So let's talk about the turn of the 20th century. This is when the United States really started to change. I mean, it wasn't just this regional player anymore. It was stepping onto the world stage, right? Ready to go toe-to-toe with the big European powers. But here's the thing. This huge explosive rise, it came with some really deep, troubling contradictions. It's this fascinating story of a nation trying to project its ideals out into the world, while at the very same time struggling with those exact ideals right here at home. So that really brings us to the big questions, right? How did America actually become a world power? And maybe more importantly, what was the cost? That's what we're going to dig into. We're going to look at how the US threw its weight around the globe and what was happening, or, what was being totally ignored within its own borders. And the answer, well, it reveals this fundamental paradox that's really at the heart of America's identity. Okay, so where does this all start? Well, it really kicks off in 1898. There's this one conflict that just changes everything, the Spanish-American War. You can think of this as America's big, dramatic entrance onto the world stage, and man, was it a fast one. But why? Why go to war in the first place? Well, it wasn't just one thing. It was a whole mix of reasons. On one hand, you had genuine sympathy for the Cuban rebels who were fighting for their independence from Spain. And there was also this idealistic, maybe a little aggressive, idea of spreading American-style democracy. But, and this is a big but, alongside all those high-minded ideals, there was a very real, very powerful ambition to grab new territory. And you can't forget the public. They were caught up in what they called war fever, just pushing and pushing for military action. And get this, the whole thing was over in less than 4 months. I mean, that's just incredible. To beat a centuries-old European power that quickly, that decisively, it sent a crystal clear message to the rest of the world. The United States was here, and it was a military force to be reckoned with. So, what happened after the dust settled? Well, Cuba did get its independence, but Puerto Rico became an American territory. And this next one is really crucial for our story. The United States took control of the Philippines. See, this wasn't just about winning a war anymore. This was the start of something totally new, an American overseas empire. Okay. But here's where the story takes a sharp turn. While America is out there projecting all this power and talking about its democratic ideals, a completely different and honestly a much darker story was playing out right back at home. And this is the central paradox of the whole era. And this slide just lays it out so clearly. It gets right to the heart of that contradiction. Think about it. Abroad, the US is fighting a war, supposedly for Cuban independence, but at home, it had already passed the Chinese Exclusion Act, a sweeping law designed specifically to ban immigration from an entire country, just based on race. The two things just don't line up. And look, this wasn't just some one-off thing. This anti-immigrant feeling had been growing all through the 1880s. It was mostly fueled by economic anxiety, people blaming Chinese immigrants for lower wages. And that led directly to that 1882 Exclusion Act. But the policy of exclusion didn't stop there. It just kept going. The US later pressured Japan to limit its own people from coming over, and states like California even passed laws to stop Japanese immigrants from owning land. It was a systematic thing. All right, let's circle back for a second. Remember the spoils from that splendid little war? Specifically, let's talk about the Philippines again, because that quick, easy victory over Spain, well, it was about to lead to a much, much longer and way more brutal conflict. See, here's the tragic part. Filipino rebels have been fighting for their own independence from Spain for years, just like the Cubans. At first, they saw the Americans as allies, as liberators. But then, after the US defeated Spain, it turned around and decided to keep the Philippines as an American territory. And just like that, a new, bitter war for independence kicked off. Only this time, they were fighting against the United States. And unlike that quick 4-month war with Spain, this was an absolutely grueling conflict. It dragged on for 3 long years, it became this brutal guerrilla war, and it cost thousands of lives. This really pulled back the curtain on the violent reality of America's new colonial ambitions. So, what was the final outcome? The United States won. The Philippines did not get its independence. In fact, it would stay a US territory for decades, all the way up until 1946. That was the long and very costly price of empire. Okay, so we've talked about direct military conquest, but the US was also flexing its muscles in a different way, a lot closer to home. It was basically establishing its dominance over all of Latin America, not just with guns, but with diplomacy and economics. And this got formalized in a policy that you've probably heard of, the Roosevelt Corollary. This was President Teddy Roosevelt's big idea. He basically just declared that the United States would act as an international police power in the Western Hemisphere. So if any Latin American country was having economic problems, the U.S. claimed a right to just step in. Now, to really get how big of a deal this was, you have to remember the old Monroe Doctrine from way back in the 1820s. That was pretty simple. It was all about telling Europe, hey, stay out of the Americas. The Roosevelt Corollary? That was a huge expansion of that idea. It wasn't just about keeping other countries out anymore. It was about asserting America's right to go in. And if you want one single symbol of this new era of American power and ambition, look no further than the Panama Canal. I mean, this was without a doubt the biggest, most incredible engineering project of its time. Hands down. To really get why it mattered so much, just think about this. Before the canal, if you were on a ship going from San Francisco to New York, you had to sail all the way down and around the southern tip of South America. That's a journey of 14,000 miles. The Panama Canal slashed that journey down to just 6,000 miles. Boom, just like that. It completely changed global trade and naval strategy literally overnight, and it cemented U.S. control over the hemisphere's two great oceans. So when you pull all these different threads together, the wars, the immigration policies, the canal, what you see is this really, really complicated legacy starting to form. This isn't a simple story. It's not a tale of good guys and bad guys. It's a story of power and paradox. I mean, you've got these two faces of America right there, side by side. On one side, you have this incredible military might and these amazing engineering triumphs. And on the other, you have colonial subjugation and deep, ugly racial conflict. It was a nation that was out there preaching about spreading democracy to the whole world while practicing exclusion right in its own backyard. And that really leaves us with one final, and I think crucial question to think about. This foundation, this paradox of a nation built on both liberty and conquest, on inclusion and exclusion, all of that was laid over a century ago. So the question for us is, how does that incredibly complex legacy continue to shape America's identity and its role in the world, right now, today?